Hello, hello. Thank you all for joining us today in this sunny afternoon. At least here in Amsterdam is very sunny. My name is Kalina and I'm going to be the host of today's webinar, which, as you can see, is in the topic of the future of retargeting in Google. A topic which is really dear to our hearts and it's really important because, as we know, at some moment in next year, Google is going to stop supporting third-party cookies, and there's going to be a new way of retargeting, a way that we all as marketeers need to learn how to work with, and this is why we're here. And maybe some of you will recall that actually last year we already started doing those educational sessions on Google FLEDGE, and we got lots of questions. And also, of course, the situation is changing because, as you know, Google FLEDGE is now called Google Protective API. There's a new name, but also right now we have the ability to give a real demo on how this new retargeting will happen. So I'm very happy to welcome here our own expert on this topic, which is David Tam. David, I think you're still on mute, but if you can unmute yourself, you can say hello to everyone.
Yeah, hi everyone. David.
Hi,
yeah,
David.
So if everyone can hear me, welcome to this session, and hopefully you'll enjoy the topic of FLEDGE in the next hour.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be a really good session. You are our expert on, we still call it internally FLEDGE because you've been involved in this project from the beginning. And you're joining us from Cannes, which is really, really exciting. You've been to an event with Amazon just yesterday. So thank you so much for making the time for this live demo. And I wanted to give a quick disclaimer before we dive in. Some points of this webinar are going to be a bit technical, but bear with us, stick with us till the end when you're going to see a real live demo on how Google Protective API works, and David is going to demonstrate live banners showing up in real time. Last note before we dive into the demo session, for those of you who don't know, this is Demio, our webinar platform. And what's important to know is that on your right hand, you have the chat. The chat is private, and we keep everything very, secure and private here. But please feel free to leave your questions over there. David and I are going to see your questions, and we're going to address them in the end. So without further ado, I want to give the stage to you, David, to dive into today's session and demo. Take it away.
Thank you, Kalina. Yes, so some people may have heard that third-party cookies will be deprecated, and Google is the only one of the big browsers that are still using it for the time being, but definitely come first Q1 of 2024, the phasing will begin. So by, I would say, middle of next year, or maybe in the Q3 of next year, the thinking is that all third-party cookies will be deprecated. So we can safely say that it will be another chapter and another chapter turned here. Okay, so let's look at first the impact to marketing. In programmatic, whether it is brand or whether it is retargeting, virtually all bidding is done through using third-party cookies. There are those exceptions where first-party identifiers are available for reach and addressability, but definitely, even as we speak today, the majority is based on third-party cookies. So imagine that come the 1st of January, there will be a cliff, and basically there will be no longer the ability to use this particular ID for programmatic display. Now, in terms of what it means to the business, like I said, there will be a reduction in reach, and it's just inconceivable to rely on just first-party identifiers like email, even some of the ID solutions that are out there. As we speak, I'm not necessarily sure whether there's enough coverage to weather the impact of third-party deprecation. So that's the first thing, is the reach. That will definitely have a knock-on effect in terms of lowering the volume of acquisition. If you are only able to reach and address, instead of 100% of your audience, you are only able to address, let's say, 20 or 30% of your audience, it will definitely have a major impact to acquisition. And then finally, the cost of acquisition will go up purely because there is far more basically demand than there is supply. And so what you'll see is that over the next 6 to 12 months, you'll see a kind of fluctuation around costs. And I guess the end result is that CPA would be a lot higher than it used to be. Okay, so those are the impacts, and so this is why it's very important that advertisers and brands now embrace a post third-party cookie world.
Yeah, the impact is really huge. And maybe just a quick note there, as for me, actually, I was always under the impression that retargeting will still continue, but then in a more secure way. But actually, when we prepared this section, you explained that, if now we can, if somebody can retarget 1 million of their audience on their website, after the changes, the percentage that is retargeted is going to be really small. Basically, only people have good ID management or other solution of those sorts. So the one-on-one retargeting will really change, and it won't be as easy and as possible as it is right now.
Definitely. So I've been following and part of the collaborative effort with a number of partners from the buy side and sell side, and even some advertisers, like, for example, the large advertisers like the Walmarts of the world in the US and Procter & Gamble. They've all been participating in this program. And FLEDGE, or what is now Protected Audience API, is one of a number of Google Privacy Sandbox initiatives. 2.5 years ago, there was a lot of skepticism whether this would actually be rolled out into production, whether the phasing of third-party cookies was even realistic. We knew at the time that Safari and also Firefox have already deprecated third-party cookies, and so it was only left to Chrome and to some extent Microsoft Edge, or what it was previously Internet Explorer. So the Microsoft Edge and Chrome constitute around about 70% of all browser users. So once they disappear, then essentially once third-party cookies are deprecated in those browsers, then effectively we are seeing virtual demise of it. This timeline is based on Google, and they have put this pretty much in stone now. So that from the 1st of January, around about 1% of browsers will no longer use third-party cookies. Even as we speak, the trial is increasing, so that when I started the trial, let's say 6 to 9 months ago, we really only had a fraction of the browser users that participated in the trial. Now there is about 5 to 10% of browser users that is actually actively participating in this trial as we speak. So therefore, there's a lot of, I would say, learnings. And out of those learnings, they are pretty certain that they can actually drive that deprecation now. So I want to quickly recap on FLEDGE for those that did not join the previous session. And then I'm going to focus very much on one particular element of FLEDGE, or Protected Audience Data, which is interest groups. And think of these as elements or use cases. So that's, and there are basically 4 or 5 elements that we need to be able to address in its entirety to ensure that we can actually continue programmatic going forward. So let's dive into a bit about FLEDGE to begin with. Now I'm going to carry on using FLEDGE rather than Protected Audience API because, you know, so I started this 2.5 years ago and I don't seem to be able to get that name off my head.
It seems also easier to pronounce, right?
Correct.
Much shorter.
When it comes to FLEDGE, there are really 4 actors in this, or 4 roles, let's say. There's the buyer on one side, there are the sellers on the other side, and both buyers and sellers want to be able to, let's say, attract the user, which essentially is the browser, which is what I call a private walled garden. And then you have a 4th factor, which is basically the trusted server. And I'll touch on a little bit about that, but essentially that is one of the design elements. Buyers want to show their ads, sellers want to basically sell their inventory. And so to that particular user will happen to be in the middle of all this. So there are 4 elements, and the 5th is the trusted server. First of all, it's the targeting, which is, and again, well, this is the topic that I'll go into in a lot more detail later. Then there is the bidding, then there is the messaging, and then there is the reporting. So in the current programmatic landscape, the bidding will be carried out between the DSPs and the SSPs typically. The messaging is something that let's say, is what ad you want to serve. And so a lot of people would be familiar with the way that ads is currently served in whether it is Seismic or Campaign Manager. And then in reporting, and this is one area which is causing, I would say, a lot of thinking and also complexity how we're going to address this going forward. That aims to protect the user's privacy, but at the same time give advertisers that level of transparency about costs. Okay, so when it comes to targeting, what we are really referring to are interest groups within FLEDGE. When it comes to the bidding, what happens in bidding within FLEDGE is that it will all be done in the browser. So the seller would actually run an on-device auction within the browser. So unlike it is today, where that happens off browser, everything is done in the browser. Likewise with messaging, the one thing that is different here is that unlike previous creatives, the creative that can be supported in FLEDGE will have to sit within what is called a fence frame. Now, I will touch upon that in a later webinar, but for the purpose of this one, I will focus purely on the targeting. And then likewise, with reporting, there are event level reporting and there is aggregate reporting. Event level reporting allows you to understand at an impression or click level what is the cost and who actually won that particular auction. Whereas on the aggregate level, what you would not see is the ability to see who is the actual individual, let's say, that actually was attributed with that impression or click. So when it comes to FLEDGE, the flow is typically this. You have the user, and from within their browser, they will go to a number of different websites. Let's say advertiser A, B, and C. Then if the user then went on to a publisher website, and the publisher will be able to see who are the interest groups within those browsers, and they will initiate auction by first soliciting from the buy side who wants to participate. The publisher will have the option to select who they want the buyers to be, and the buyers have the option to participate in that auction. And then let's say if you happen to win that bid, so all the buyers present their bid, the winning bid will have their ad served essentially within the browser. So in simple terms, that's how it works within FLEDGE. And it's not that dissimilar to how it would work in programmatic as we speak today. except that there are definitely different nuances around this. And the biggest of which is that everything happens in browser. Right, so I'm going to go into a little bit more about the interest groups now. And I'll kick off with discussing a little bit about ownership. When we come to talk about audiences, which are effectively interest groups, there are three potential owners. One is the advertiser. The advertiser could own that interest group. The other one is the publisher. So if a user visit a publisher website, they can also create their own interest group and say to the advertisers or the buying platform, say, would you like to bid for this particular interest group as well? Then there are the technology partners. These typically could be the DSPs. It could, for me, I think it's more likely to be in the realm of the CDP going forward, or there will be a conversion between DSPs and CDPs going forward. So what the advertiser would do, because it's quite technical when it comes to supporting all the various elements and use cases, they may prefer, or they would probably prefer, to work with a technology partner that can actually support all those different use cases. So they would say to technology partner like Relay42, said, right, okay, I want you to be my buying and also be my targeting partner here. So we will be able to create the interest group, and I'll show you in a demonstration later how all those elements come into play in a live environment. Okay, so
yeah, it is a bit technical right now and a bit maybe theoretical, but it's good to understand the principle before we go into the demonstration. Yeah. Indeed.
So privacy is a key design principle within FLEDGE. The advertiser will need to delegate to, let's say, a technology partner that they can create and own the interest group. By owning that interest group, it means that you will be able to facilitate the bidding, the ad serving, and the reporting. Then the users will also need to give their consent. So the users will have discretion whether they want to be shown ads. And there are other permissions that are specific within FLEDGE. For example, there is the permission to join an interest group. There is the permission to leave an interest group, for example. Those are permissions that the user will also need to grant the advertiser or the owner of that interest group. Then there is the buyer. So the advertiser, before they can delegate, there needs to be some form of handshake between the advertiser and the buyer that will permit the buyer to manage that interest group, but also for the buyer to represent the advertiser. So the buyer will need to be able to whitelist all the authorized first-party domains. There is a little bit of technicality around the language, but please bear with me around this because I think in time this will be a lot clearer, but for the time being, there's a lot of permission that we had to basically architect around this demo. So when it comes to the analogy of an interest group, there are basically what we call the number of attributes. And the attributes are key to determining what you can actually do. So for example, the two mandatory attributes are the name and owner. And the owner is really the domain. So for example, in the case of Relay, it will be something like www.relay42.com. That is the domain that owns this particular interest group. And the interest group could be any number of interest groups or retargeting groups that you want to build. So if you were, let's say, a retailer, you may want to basically build a number of interest groups around product of interest. Or you can basically build a number of, you can build let's say an interest group on people who abandon cart, for example. Or you can build an interest group around other points of interest or behavioral data. So there's a whole load of interest groups that are that you can build, not that dissimilar to how you would create audiences that you wish to retarget today. So you can create any number. There are certain constraints around that. One constraint is that the size of this interest group, it cannot be over 50 kilobytes, meaning that in its totality, they cannot be more than 50 kilobytes of, let's say, users, and also the number of ads and ad components. And I'll go into those in a minute. There are many attributes here that I'm not going to go into for the purpose of this particular session, but definitely something that if you are interested in this, we can just explore on a one-to-one, because some of these may not be applicable depending on your objectives. So one of the things that is important here is the bidding logic. The bidding logic is the let's say the rules around what you want to bid for that particular interest group. And there is going to be a lot of work around this over time. And it could be very simple, or it can be very, I would say, sophisticated, because the bidding will actually affect a lot of how you, it's in terms of ROAS and conversions. So bidding is a very key component of the interest group. The other thing is the ads and ads components. And typically with programmatic, as we see today, you can actually run DCO campaigns in FLEDGE as well. So there are basically a number of ad creators that an interest group can support, and you can actually determine what would be the correct, let's say, ad creative for a particular set of users within an interest group. Equally, you can actually say which ad component, and think of ad components a bit like, for example, images. You may have different product images. So for these particular users of an interest group that happen to be interested in, let's say, in trainers, what you want to do is show pictures of trainers. And this is what it allows you to do within the ad components. So it does support DCO very well within interest groups, which is one of the design considerations around this. Then there are others which explains how real-time signals will work, particularly real-time bidding signals, and also real-time in terms of ad rotation as well. You may want to replenish ads. So if a certain ad is not working, then you want to replace that ad with something that was more fresh and something that's more likely to work in terms of getting users to click on that ad, and certainly and then go, let's say, back to your website. So we'll be experimenting with all these different attributes over time. So I'm going to go straight into the demonstration, but before then, I thought I'd pause there, Kalina, in case if there are any questions.
Yeah. Not so far, only whether we'll be sending the recording, and just for everyone, yes, we'll be sharing the recording with everyone in the coming days.
Okay.
And of course, you can always reach out afterwards, but yeah, no, so far so good.
Perfect. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully everyone can see that. Okay.
Getting there. That's actually maybe the most exciting part, to really see it for the first time in practice.
Yeah, so this is a live demonstration, meaning the auction is happening in real time. It's basically showing the ad that won. So the auction will be happening in real time, and also the winning ad will be served in real time. There are three different tabs I've got open. The first tab is the Relay 42 tab. And what you'll see here in this Relay 42 tab is an audience with everyone that's actually seen an ad, and we with this
Oh,
all impressions that we have actually won. Of
sorry, David. I think we lost you for a second, or at least your screen stopped being
okay,
shareable. Could you try
yeah,
again?
let me do that again.
There was a glitch.
All right, can you see my screen?
Let's try.
All right, great. So
Yes.
okay, so if we win the auction, we will see that this incremented here. So at the moment we have seen that we've won it 4 times, so the 4 impressions were served, and this represents the winning impressions here. I also have, this is the advertiser. So this is the where we will basically create the interest group. There is the buyer in this case is what is a domain called explorefledge.com, which you would not see here. But that buyer sits in the background, and it basically allows that buyer to represent the bid, the ad serving, and also the reporting. Then we have the seller or the publisher, and the publisher wants to sell this ad space here, for example. And what you'll see is that there has been numerous scenes basically running over the last couple of hours. So here on the publisher website, you'll see things like leave interest group, join interest group, loaded, bid, win. These are all the actions that basically took place in real time. Likewise, if I go here, you will see the same thing here, where you see join, loaded, bid, win, right, on this side. What I'm going to do is simulate the joining of an interest group. So let's say I'm a user, I go onto the Tampster website, and I actually want the advertiser wants to retarget me. So I would basically join that interest group. So if I go to that interest group, a little bit technical, but let me simulate that here. So I now join the interest group, and when I look at the application, you see that I've joined that interest group. I'm the buyer and the owner is called explorefledge.com, and that interest group has a name Science here. Likewise, if you go to the publisher website, it will have that join here as well. Now, when I participate in this auction, so I'm going to click on this, I've joined the interest group, and the winning bid will win that auction and the ad will be served. If we win the bid, this ad called Belarus will be served on the publisher website. So I'm going to simulate the auction now. And as you can see, my ad was served because it was the highest bid. I look down here and you can see that both the Privacy Sandbox OpenX participated in the auction. We also participated in the auction, but we actually won the bid here. And when we win the bid, we will see that report. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of what that looks like. So this is basically what is shared with us in terms of reporting. It tells us basically what was the highest bid. It tells us what the ad was served. It tells us who the owner was, etc. And within Relay 42, we capture all those signals in here, and this will be incremented by 1 very shortly. So let me just refresh that. So as you can see, we won the impression and that was incremented by 1. All this is happening within the browser in real time and between the buyer and seller. So this is the demonstration of FLEDGE. And hopefully that gives you a feel for how this works, what you could be doing. Certainly be thinking about how you want to leverage retargeting going forward, which is completely cookie or ID free.
Great. Thanks, David, for this demo. I'm happy that it looks really different of how we're used to. The fact that it's all happening in the browser. Yeah, to me, I think it would take some time to get used to that. But yeah, it is what it is, and maybe it will get better as the project progresses. But it's good to see how things are gonna go. And it works. So this is also great to see that it works and it's real time. So that's already good. We have a few questions here for you in the little time remaining for this session. One of the questions is, who manages this backend process in the browser?
So within Chrome, Google built a whole bunch of functionality. For example, one of those functionality is the auction, and they call these worklets. So that part is built within Chrome. So they have to enable the infrastructure around all this, essentially. However, in terms of the creation of interest groups, the bidding, the ad serving, and reporting, all that is done outside the browser. Sorry, not outside, it's outside of Chrome. And that is done by the technology vendors. So the technology vendors will have to build that buying and selling infrastructure around Chrome. I hope that it's quite conceptual, granted, but yeah, so there's definitely a lot of development that the technology partners will need to do.
Right. And you've been involved in this project from the beginning. Do you know how many companies are already experimenting with protected audience
Some of the big retail advertisers have been participating in this as long as I have been. As mentioned before, the likes of Walmart, because there is a vested interest in this from their point of view. The one thing that really attracts a lot of advertisers in this is that it is completely cookie free, and it is the most privacy safe way of serving ads without antagonizing the users, and also making sure that they are compliant with regulation. So this is and because there are no exchange of data, because one of the problems with third-party cookies is that you can actually track users across different browsing sessions and different websites. That was the one thing that basically really did cause a lot of governments around the world concern that the user's privacy was invaded. With this, there's no real way of actually tracking user data, and the only people that would actually say, for example, only the advertisers or the owner of the interest group will actually know who are in those interest groups, but the sell side don't know who they are. All they know is there's an interest group, and they just have to inform basically the buyer whether they want to participate in the auction. So there's just no way for neither party to know anything about their audiences. Hello, Elena. It's okay.
I think I was on mute. Sorry, we have one more question. So about mobile retargeting, does Chrome support mobile retargeting? Do we know what happens if we try to retarget on Chrome?
Yeah, so mobile, if it's mobile web, it's the same. But if it's mobile app, then basically Android has also got a version of Fledge for mobile app. And so that is also consistent with basically the way that Google are approaching this across their different, let's say, product lines or estate. So they see this as universally applicable across different touch points. And we will be also looking at that as well. But it's for us, it's one step at a time. So what we need to make sure is that first we address the mobile web or desktop web, and then we'll basically move into mobile app.
Mobile, yeah. Now one more question here. Can you say a bit more on contextual advertising with first and second, third-party data in this new cookieless world with respect to building those interest groups?
Yeah, so I kind of need to unpack this question into multiple questions here, really. So Fledge doesn't really address data. It certainly doesn't see it's completely blind to what data that is, whether it's first, second, or third. All Fledge, Fledge focus on if you as a user went onto the advertiser website and you want to retarget me in programmatic, that's where Fledge comes in. And whilst a lot of advertisers may not think that display adds very much to conversion or acquisition, I would say that display does assist in a significant part of acquisition, because only when it's gone do you realize how much it does assist in the actual conversion and acquisition. Because without display, I think the other channels would become far more inefficient. Because display sometimes is the glue between first and last click. And therefore it is something that I think it will be sorely missed if advertisers didn't actually support this. When it comes to, let's say, completely anonymous users, let's say, and you just want to be able to, let's say, prospect, that's more in the domain of topics, by the way. So topics is probably analogous to contextual advertising, or it's definitely closest to it because it's all interest-based. So, for example, there would be a taxonomy of interest, like, for example, are you a sports enthusiast? Are you a newsreader? There's all these different, taxonomy categories, and essentially what the publishers or the sellers will say, right, is I want to sell this category of users, and therefore, basically, the various buyers can make a bid for that. So in terms of topics, they don't actually have to appear on the advertiser website in that case. Hopefully that answers your question around contextual, but definitely something that we can go into a bit more if it didn't properly answer that question.
Yeah. I think we have time for one or two more questions. One is about contextual advertising. Is this an option? Will it be mandatory even? Will there be an option for contextual groups or data data targeting?
Yeah, so contextual, I guess as commented before, that's more in the kind of purview of topics. That's how I see it. And there are basically, so maybe just a little bit on expansion on that. Google did have a taxonomy around all the different interest group or contextual groups. But what they felt is that in order to get wider adoption, is actually better to have an independent body creating that taxonomy, so it's a little bit less biased. So what they have done is kind of suggested to the IAB as the custodian of that taxonomy. So that kind of makes sense. That means because you're going to get more buy-in then from the different parties from the buy side or sell side here. Then you said, is it option or mandatory?
Probably. Yeah, is there? Is the contextual advertising an option, or will it be mandatory? Was the question.
It's only mandatory in the sense that the business needs to basically run, let's say, essentially prospecting or brand or awareness campaigns in order to serve a particular KPI. So, yeah, I mean, I do think it is, because I don't know any advertiser, particularly that aren't interested in acquiring new customers. Certainly customers that are not aware that they exist. So I think that is something that is definitely important. To the point where, is it business critical? I would say, yeah, for definitely a large percentage of advertisers, it is definitely business critical. Not unless you have an abundance of existing customers to go after, and your revenue is purely made up of those existing customers.
Yeah. And another question here: will data targeting be eliminated?
Not from the CDP. Not from the CDP, because when you build this interest group, it would not be purely based on, let's say, behavioral data on websites. It could also be based on your CRM, for example. It could also be based on other types of data that you will be able to source from a variety of different touch points, like social data, potentially. You bring that all in, and therefore you can actually refine your targeting. So let me give you an example. You as a user may be very active on, let's say, TikTok with a particular brand, but you may not be aware of that user being very active on that on TikTok across, let's say, the products that you sell, because they very rarely appear on your website. Therefore, those users are completely invisible to the brand or advertiser. And therefore, it's still worth retargeting those users so that happens to be more interactive with TikTok than it is on your website.
Right. And for the targeting itself, right? So not for retargeting, but for targeting.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we will be exploring, how we can basically retarget to people that happens to be spending most of their time on different, let's say, touch points and channels.
Yeah. Sorry, we know we're progressing in the time. One last question. So, do you think CDPs are going to be the leading technology to work with FLEDGE, or is this now something DMPs will re-engineer to support?
I think there will be a consolidation.
What do you think?
DSPs will become CDPs, CDPs will become DSPs, and I think there's going to be a hell of a lot of consolidation in the marketplace. I think this is a real big disruptor. I mean, I knew programmatic 25 years ago when I first involved in kind of media and digital advertising. For 25 years, it hasn't changed. And then 25 years on, it's the biggest change that the market has seen. So, will CDPs be the leading? I mean, I would say yes, and that's not because I'm biased and work for a CDP company, but I do think the CDPs are actually better placed to support this than any other tech.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there were some other questions, please drop us a line and reach out to David after this webinar. We'll send you the recording in the coming days so that you can rewatch or share with colleagues as you like. For now, we're closing the session. Thanks everyone for joining us on this live webinar. And of course, many thanks for David for preparing this live demonstration and giving us this insight and sneak peek into what's going to be the future of retargeting on Google. Thank you so much, and have a great afternoon, everyone.